Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UEG's Defiance, watching the stars through the main window when the message came in. The communication officer turned around with a worried look on his face and said the signal was coming from somewhere far beyond human space. Jake told him to put it on the main screen, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms appeared on the screen, wearing golden robes that seemed to shine with their own light. The creature had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across its face, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. It said its name was Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire, and it brought news that would change everything for humanity. The ambassador explained that every 1,000 years the galaxy held a great tournament called the Universal Combat Championship. Every species that had reached the stars was required to send their greatest warrior to compete in single combat across 6 different worlds. The rules were simple, but the stakes were higher than anything humanity had ever faced. The winning species would gain control over 3 entire star systems, filled with rare metals and energy sources that could power civilizations for millions of years. The losing species would be forced to leave their current territories and move to the outer rim of the galaxy, where only dead worlds and empty space waited for them. There would be no second chances and no appeals. Jake felt his hands tighten into fists as the ambassador continued speaking. The alien said that 47 different species had already confirmed their participation, including some of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Each one would send their most deadly fighter to compete in challenges that had killed thousands of warriors over the centuries. The ambassador then did something that made Jake's anger rise like fire in his chest. Veltar smiled with what looked like hundreds of tiny sharp teeth and said that humanity was welcome to decline the invitation, since everyone knew they were weak creatures who had only recently learned to travel between stars. The alien said most people expected humans to run away rather than face real warriors in honest combat. Before Jake could respond, the message changed and showed other alien representatives making their own announcements. A massive creature covered in scales and standing 12 feet tall declared that the draconian hegemony would send their champion Lord Scales the Mighty, who had never lost a battle in 300 years of war. The dragon-like being looked directly at the camera and said that soft pink humans would crumble like dust when they faced true power. Another alien that looked like it was made of living crystal announced that the ancient Titan Confederation would send Cronus the Destroyer. The crystalline being had fought for 3,000 years and had never been defeated by any opponent. Its body could withstand the force of exploding stars, and its strength could crack planets in half. More representatives appeared on screen, each one more terrifying than the last. There was Brutus Prime of the Corvin Collective, who stood 15 feet tall and had bone blades growing from his arms. Whisper Death of the Ethereal Consortium looked like a ghost made of purple energy that could pass through solid matter. Stormcaller of the Weather Masters could control lightning and hurricanes with a thought. Jake watched all of these announcements and felt something burning in his chest that he had never felt before. These aliens thought humans were nothing more than weak creatures who would run away at the first sign of danger. They believed that 50 years of peaceful contact meant humanity had gone soft and lost whatever fighting spirit they might have once had. When the message ended, Jake turned to his communication officer and told him to open a channel back to Earth immediately. Within minutes, he was speaking directly to Admiral Lisa Carter, who was in charge of all human military forces. She had seen the message too and looked just as angry as Jake felt. The Admiral said she was thinking about declining the invitation because humanity had never faced anything like this before. Their best soldiers were trained to fight other humans, not alien monsters with supernatural powers. She said it might be better to negotiate or find some other way to avoid the tournament entirely. Jake interrupted her and said he wanted to volunteer as Earth's champion. The admiral looked surprised and reminded him that he was a ship captain, not a professional fighter. Jake said he knew the odds were against him, but someone had to stand up for humanity and show these aliens that humans were not the weak creatures they believed them to be. Admiral Carter was quiet for a long moment before she said she would need to discuss this with the other military leaders and the government. Jake said he understood, but asked her to remember that every human who had ever lived was counting on whoever took this challenge. The aliens had made it clear that failure meant exile to the empty regions of space where humanity would slowly die out over the centuries. After the call ended, Jake stood alone on his bridge looking out at the stars and wondering if he had just volunteered for a suicide mission that would doom his entire species. 3 months later, Jake found himself deep underground in a secret training facility built inside the Rocky Mountains. The government had approved his request to represent humanity, but they made it clear that he would need to become something more than just a regular soldier if he wanted to survive even one day of the tournament. Colonel Ryan Hayes was waiting for him when he arrived at the facility. The colonel was a big man with scars covering his arms and a reputation for training the toughest soldiers in the human military. He looked Jake up and down like he was examining a piece of broken equipment and said they had exactly 90 days to turn him into something that could fight monsters. The training began before dawn every day and continued until Jake collapsed from exhaustion. Hayes had studied every piece of information Earth had about alien species and their fighting styles. He explained that most alien warriors relied on their natural advantages like superior strength or armored skin or deadly claws. They had evolved over millions of years to be perfect killing machines. Maria Santos joined the training program in the second week. She was a combat specialist who had learned fighting techniques from dozens of different human cultures. She taught Jake how to use any object as a weapon and how to turn an enemy's strength against them. She said the key was not to fight like the aliens expected, but to do things they had never seen before. Dr. Nina Walsh arrived at the facility with boxes full of alien technology and biological samples that Earth's diplomats had managed to collect over the years. She spent hours showing Jake videos of previous tournaments and pointing out weaknesses in how the alien fighters moved and thought. She said most of them followed predictable patterns because they had never needed to adapt to unexpected situations. The doctor explained that humanity's greatest strength was not their muscles or their weapons, but their ability to solve problems in new ways. Humans had survived on Earth by learning to use tools and work together and think faster than stronger predators. She believed these same skills could work against alien opponents if Jake learned how to use them properly. Jake's training took place in rooms that could recreate any environment found on alien worlds. One day he would fight holographic enemies in crushing gravity that made every step feel like lifting a mountain. The next day he would practice combat while swimming through acid that would dissolve his equipment in seconds. Each session pushed his body and mind beyond what any human had ever attempted. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were preparing their own champions. Intelligence reports reached Earth describing warriors that seemed impossible to defeat. Brutus Prime of the Corvin Collective had been grown in a laboratory from the genes of their greatest fighters. His bones were harder than steel, and his reflexes were faster than human eyes could follow. The Ethereal Consortium had chosen Whisper Death, who existed as pure energy most of the time. Physical attacks passed right through its body while it could strike opponents with bolts of power that could melt armor. No one had ever figured out how to hurt something that had no solid form to attack. Most terrifying of all was Cronus the Destroyer, who represented the Titan Confederation. The crystalline giant had fought in 17 previous tournaments and won every single battle. Its body had been forged in the heart of a dying star and could survive forces that would destroy entire planets. Ancient records showed it had once punched through the core of a moon just to prove its strength. As Jake's training continued, he began to realize that trying to match these creatures in terms of raw power would be suicide. Instead, he focused on learning how to use speed and intelligence and the environment around him. Hayes taught him that every arena had weaknesses that could be exploited if a fighter was smart enough to find them. Santa showed him how to read an opponent's movements and predict what they would do next. She said most fighters fell into habits that made them predictable, especially when they thought they were winning. The key was to appear weaker than he really was until the perfect moment came to strike back. Dr. Walsh's research revealed that many alien species had never faced opponents who could adapt quickly to changing situations. Their evolution had made them perfect for specific types of combat, but left them vulnerable when forced to deal with unexpected tactics. She believed Jake's human flexibility could surprise enemies who expected him to fight in predictable ways. Final month of training focused on mental preparation as much as physical conditioning. Jake learned meditation techniques that would help him stay calm when facing terrifying opponents. He practiced visualization exercises where he imagined fighting creatures even more dangerous than the ones he would actually face. Hayes reminded him every day that humanity's survival depended on his performance in the tournament. If he failed, then Earth would be forced to give up its colonies and retreat to the edge of the galaxy where there were no resources to support human civilization. Billions of people would die slowly as their technology failed and their worlds became uninhabitable. On the last day of training, Jake stood in the center of the facility's main arena while holographic projections of his likely opponents attacked him from all sides. He moved through the simulation like a dancer, avoiding claws and energy blasts and crushing blows while striking back at weak points he had learned to identify. When the simulation ended, Hayes and Santos and Dr. Walsh stood, watching him with expressions he could not read. Finally, the colonel nodded and said Jake was as ready as any human could be. They had given him every advantage possible, but the rest would depend on his ability to think and adapt when facing real enemies who wanted to kill him. Packed his few possessions and boarded the transport ship UES Horizon that would carry him to the tournament. As Earth grew smaller behind them, he wondered if he would ever see his home world again, or if he was flying toward humanity's final defeat. The UES Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a massive space station that looked like a small metal moon. Jake pressed his face against the window and saw ships from dozens of different species docked at various ports along the station surface. Some vessels were elegant and curved like flowing water, while others looked like giant weapons bristling with spikes and armor plating. Ambassador Veltar met Jake at the docking bay along with several other officials wearing the same golden robes. The blue-skinned alien's 6 eyes studied Jake carefully as if trying to determine whether humans had sent a real warrior or just someone to die quickly and entertain the crowd. Veltar said the opening ceremony would begin in 2 hours and Jake should prepare himself to meet his fellow competitors. The ceremony took place in an arena so large that Jake could barely see the other side. Thousands of aliens filled the stands, cheering and making sounds that hurt his ears. In the center of the arena stood a platform where representatives from each species waited with their chosen champions. Jake walked out onto the platform and immediately felt like a child surrounded by giants. Brutus Prime of the Corvin Collective stood 15 feet tall with muscles that looked like they were carved from stone. Bone blades extended from his forearms and his eyes glowed red in the arena lights. When he saw Jake, he laughed and the sound was like boulders crashing down a mountain. He said humans were even smaller and weaker than he had expected. Whisper. Death appeared as a shifting cloud of purple energy that occasionally took on a humanoid shape before dissolving back into mist. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, and Jake felt cold fingers touching his mind. The entity said it could sense Jake's fear and would feed on his terror when they eventually fought. Cronus the Destroyer stood 20 feet away, but Jake could feel the power radiating from the crystal giant's body like heat from a furnace. The ancient warrior looked down at Jake with eyes that glowed like stars and said nothing. Somehow its silence was more frightening than all the threats and insults from the other competitors. The tournament director explained the rules to the gathered champions. There would be 6 different worlds, each designed to test different aspects of combat ability. The first world was Inferno Prime, where fighters would battle on a planet covered in active volcanoes. The second was Frost Eternal, where the temperature never rose above freezing and ice storms could freeze a warrior solid in seconds. The third world was called Gravity Maze and featured shifting gravitational fields that could crush bones or send fighters floating helplessly into space. The fourth world was Mind Trap, where competitors faced not only physical combat, but psychic attacks designed to destroy their sanity. The fifth world was Chaos Realm, where the environment changed every few minutes without warning. The final world was simply called Ultimate Arena, and no details were given except that it would test everything the surviving fighters had learned. The director said that in 3,000 years of tournaments, only 12 champions had ever reached the final world, and only 3 had survived to tell about it. Jake's first opponent was announced as Razorwing of the Avian Supremacy. The 15-foot-tall bird-like creature had metallic feathers that gleamed like knives and talons that could tear through steel plating. Its wings spanned 30 feet, and when it moved, the air currents were strong enough to knock a human off their feet. The transport to Inferno Prime took 6 hours, and Jake spent the time studying everything Dr. Walsh had taught him about volcanic environments. The planet's surface was covered in lava flows, and geysers of poisonous gas shot up from cracks in the ground. The temperature was hot enough to melt most metals, and the air was so thick with ash that visibility was limited to a few dozen yards. When the battle began, Razorwing immediately took to the air and attacked from above using its superior speed and flight advantage. Its metallic feathers shot toward Jake like bullets, and each one was sharp enough to cut through his armor. Jake rolled behind a boulder of cooled lava and tried to think of a way to fight an enemy he could barely see through the volcanic ash. The bird creature circled overhead, making hunting cries that echoed off the canyon walls. Jake realized that Razorwing was using the same tactics it had probably used for millions of years, hunting prey on its home world. The alien was predictable because it had never needed to adapt to fighting opponents who could think and plan. Jake studied the volcanic activity around the arena and noticed that certain areas showed signs of instability. Cracks in the ground, leaked superheated steam, and the lava flows followed predictable patterns based on the terrain. He began moving toward a section where several lava tubes intersected, knowing that Razorwing would follow. When the bird creature dove toward him, Jake threw himself to the side and struck a specific rock formation with his combat knife. The impact triggered a small eruption that sent lava and steam shooting upward in a column of fire. Razorwing flew directly into the superheated cloud, and its metallic feathers began to glow red-hot. The alien crashed to the ground with its wings damaged and unable to fly. Jake pressed his advantage by using the volcanic terrain to limit Razorwing's movement options. Every time the creature tried to take flight, Jake triggered another small eruption or used the unstable ground to throw it off balance. The battle ended when Jake managed to maneuver Razorwing onto a section of ground that looked solid, but was actually a thin crust over a lava pocket. The bird's weight broke through the surface, and it fell into the molten rock below. Jake heard its death scream echo across the volcanic landscape before the lava consumed it completely. In the observation area above the arena, alien spectators sat in stunned silence. Most had expected the human to die within the first few minutes of combat. Instead, Jake had defeated a champion that had won dozens of battles by using the environment as a weapon rather than trying to match his opponent's natural advantages. Ambassador Veltar turned to his assistants and said the human's victory was interesting, but probably just luck. He said Jake would not survive his next opponent, who was much more dangerous than a simple flying predator. The other alien officials agreed. That humanity's champion had gotten lucky once, but would certainly die in the second challenge. Jake stood alone in the arena surrounded by cooling lava and drifting ash. He had won his first battle but knew that each subsequent opponent would be stronger and more dangerous than the last. Somewhere in the back of his mind he could hear Colonel Hayes, reminding him that humanity's survival depended on his ability to keep winning no matter what monsters he faced. The second challenge took place on Frost Eternal, where the temperature dropped to minus 200 degrees and ice storms could freeze flesh solid in seconds. Jake's opponent was Glacier Fist of the Cryogenic Union, who looked like a walking mountain of blue ice with glowing white eyes. The creature was 12 feet tall and grew stronger as the temperature dropped. Jake's breath formed clouds of ice crystals as soon as he stepped onto the frozen battlefield. His combat suit's heating systems struggled to keep him alive while Glacier Fist moved across the ice like it was warm summer ground. The alien's footsteps left frozen craters, and when it punched the air, the cold was so intense that moisture froze and fell like snow. The ice creature attacked immediately by launching frozen spears from its fingertips. Each projectile was sharp, enough to pierce steel and cold enough to freeze blood in Jake's veins if it hit him. Jake dodged behind an ice formation and felt the spears shatter against the frozen barrier, sending deadly fragments in all directions. Jake realized that his normal body heat was actually an advantage in this environment, even though it made him an easy target for his opponent's thermal vision. He began moving rapidly across the battlefield using friction and exercise to generate warmth. Every time he stopped moving, the cold tried to seep into his bones, but constant motion kept his blood flowing. Glacier Fist followed Jake's heat signature and attacked with crushing blows that could shatter stone. But the alien moved slowly because its massive ice body was difficult to maneuver quickly. Jake used his superior speed to stay just ahead of the creature's attacks while looking for weaknesses in its crystalline structure. During one exchange, Jake noticed that when Glacier Fist exerted maximum effort, steam rose from cracks in its body, where internal heat met the external cold. The alien was not actually made of solid ice, but rather some kind of biological creature that generated extreme cold to protect itself. This meant it had vulnerable points where the temperature differential was greatest. Jake began targeting these stress points with precise strikes, using his combat knife heated by friction against metal surfaces. Each hit caused spiderweb cracks to spread across Glacier Fist's body, and the creature roared in pain and anger. But instead of backing away, the alien became more aggressive and its attacks grew stronger. The battle reached its climax when Glacier Fist trapped Jake in a corner between two ice walls and prepared to crush him with both massive fists. Jake realized he had only seconds before the creature's overwhelming strength would end the fight. In desperation, he grabbed handfuls of loose ice and snow and began rubbing them together as fast as possible. The friction generated enough heat to create small pockets of liquid water, which Jake immediately threw at the stress points he had identified in Glacier Fist's body. When the warm water hit the supercooled alien flesh, it caused thermal shock that spread existing cracks throughout the creature's entire structure. Glacier Fist's body began falling apart as the thermal differential tore it from the inside out. The alien tried to continue fighting even as pieces of its frozen form broke away and shattered on the ground. Finally, the creature's core temperature regulation failed, and it collapsed into a pile of ordinary ice that quickly melted in the arena's artificial atmosphere. Jake stood over the remains of his second opponent, shivering from cold and exhaustion. But alive. The alien spectators were no longer dismissing his victories as luck. Ambassador Veltar spoke quietly with other officials about the humans' unusual fighting methods and whether they represented a threat to more powerful champions. The third world was called Gravity Maze and featured an arena where gravitational fields shifted without warning. One moment fighters experienced normal Earth gravity, and the next they might be crushed by forces 10 times stronger or sent floating helplessly toward the ceiling. Jake's opponent was Iron Will of the Magnetic Lords, who could control metal and magnetic fields. Iron Will appeared as a humanoid figure wearing armor made from polished steel. Its body generated powerful magnetic fields that could attract or repel any metal object within 100 yards. The alien could turn every piece of equipment in the arena into a weapon while making Jake's gear useless or even dangerous. When the battle began, Iron Will immediately seized control of Jake's weapons and armor and tried to use them to crush him. Jake's combat knife flew from his hand and struck the wall with enough force to bury itself to the hilt in solid metal. His armor plates began constricting around his body like a mechanical snake, trying to squeeze the life out of him. Jake managed to escape from his armor before it could kill him, but now he faced a nearly naked opponent who controlled everything metallic in the arena. Iron Will laughed and began hurling chunks of metal debris with magnetic force. Each projectile moved faster than bullets and hit with the power of artillery shells. The shifting gravity made movement nearly impossible as Jake tried to dodge the metal storm. One moment he was pressed against the floor by crushing force, and the next he was floating toward spinning metal blades that Iron Will had set in motion. The alien seemed unaffected by the gravitational changes and continued its relentless attack. Jake noticed that Iron Will's magnetic abilities were so strong they interfered with the arena's gravity generation equipment. Every time the alien used maximum power, the gravitational fields became unstable and fluctuated wildly. Jake realized he could use this interference to his advantage if he was willing to take enormous risks. He began deliberately damaging his own equipment to create electrical feedback that would attract Iron Will's magnetic attacks. When the alien tried to control the damaged electronics, the resulting interference caused the gravity generators to malfunction. Suddenly, the entire arena was caught in chaotic gravitational fields that affected both fighters equally. Iron Will found itself unable to control the metal debris as gravitational forces stronger than its magnetic abilities took over. The alien was caught in a zone of zero gravity while Jake managed to reach an area where normal gravity still functioned. For the first time in the battle, Jake had a positional advantage. Jake used pieces of non-metallic debris to attack Iron Will while the alien struggled to orient itself in the zero-gravity field. Without stable footing, Iron Will could not generate the concentrated magnetic fields needed for its most powerful attacks. The alien tried to reach areas with normal gravity, but Jake used the environmental chaos to keep it trapped. The battle ended when a massive gravitational fluctuation caught Iron Will between two opposing fields that pulled in different directions. The alien's metallic body was literally torn apart by forces it could not resist or control. Jake watched as his opponent was scattered across the arena in a shower of metal fragments. 3 victories had earned Jake the attention of every species in the galaxy. News reports described the human's unusual tactics and speculated about whether he represented a new type of warrior that could threaten the Phaeton established order. Lord Scales of the Draconian hegemony publicly declared that Jake's wins were flukes that would end when he faced truly superior opponents. The fourth world was Mind Trap, where fighters faced psychic attacks as well as physical combat. Jake's opponent was Echo Thought of the telepathic collective who appeared as a tall, thin humanoid with an oversized head and glowing silver eyes. The alien could read minds and project devastating mental assaults that had driven previous opponents insane. As soon as Jake entered the arena, he felt Echo Thought's presence invading his mind like cold fingers searching through his memories. The alien showed him visions of Earth being destroyed and his friends dying because of his failures. Jake saw himself losing every remaining battle in humanity, being exiled to die slowly in the empty regions of space. The psychic assault was more painful than any physical injury Jake had ever experienced. Echo Thought pulled up every fear and insecurity from his past and used them as weapons against his sanity. Jake saw himself as a child being abandoned by his parents and as a soldier watching his comrades die because of his mistakes. But Jake's military training had prepared him for psychological warfare, even if not on this scale. He had learned to compartmentalize traumatic experiences and focus on immediate objectives rather than long-term consequences. While Echo Thought attacked his mind, Jake forced his body to continue fighting despite the mental agony. Jake realized that Echo Thought's psychic abilities required intense concentration, which made the alien vulnerable during the moments when its mental attacks were strongest. Every time the telepathic assault reached maximum intensity, Echo Thought became less aware of physical threats in the immediate area. Jake began timing his physical attacks to coincide with the peaks of Echo Thought's psychic assaults. While the alien was focused on destroying his sanity, Jake struck at its body with everything he had. The strategy was incredibly painful as he had to endure maximum mental torture to create opportunities for counterattack. The battle became a test of willpower as much as combat skill. Jake's mind felt like it was being torn apart, but he refused to surrender to the visions and fears that Echo Thought used against him. He reminded himself that every human who had ever lived was depending on his ability to endure whatever these aliens could do to him. Jake's victory over Echo Thought left him mentally exhausted but still alive when only 4 champions remained in the tournament. The 5th world, called Chaos Realm, presented the most dangerous challenge yet as the environment changed every few minutes without warning. One moment fighters battled underwater and the next they were in zero gravity or surrounded by electrical storms. His opponent was Venom Strike of the Poison Syndicate, who looked like a giant serpent walking upright on 2 legs. The alien's entire body secreted deadly toxins that could kill most life forms with a single touch. Purple poison dripped from its fangs and claws while toxic gas rose from its skin in visible clouds that burned Jake's eyes even from a distance. The battle began in what appeared to be a crystal cave with walls that reflected light in beautiful patterns. But within minutes, the arena shifted to a windswept mountain peak where hurricane force gusts threatened to blow both fighters off the edge. Jake realized he would need to use these environmental changes to avoid direct contact with his poisonous opponent. Venom Strike moved like liquid death across whatever terrain the arena provided. Its serpentine body could adapt to any surface, while its poison remained equally deadly whether they fought on land or in water or floating in zero gravity. The alien hissed threats in a language that sounded like steam escaping from a broken pipe. When the environment changed to an underwater cavern, Jake saw his opportunity. The constant flow of water would dilute Venom Strike's toxins and carry them away before they could build up to lethal concentrations. Jake dove deep and used the strong currents to his advantage while avoiding the alien's attempts to inject him with concentrated venom. Venom Strike was slower underwater because its serpentine body was designed for land movement. Jake used his superior swimming ability to stay just out of reach while the alien struggled with the unfamiliar environment. Every time Venom Strike tried to release a cloud of poison gas, the water current swept it away before it could affect Jake. The arena changed again to a chamber filled with spinning metal blades, but Jake had learned to predict the timing of environmental shifts. He positioned himself so that when the change occurred, Venom Strike would be caught in the most dangerous area while Jake reached relative safety behind a barrier. The alien's tough scales protected it from the spinning blades, but the constant need to dodge and weave disrupted its attack patterns. Venom Strike could not maintain the precise movements needed to deliver killing doses of poison while also avoiding mechanical death traps that appeared and disappeared with each environmental change. Jake realized that Venom Strike's greatest strength was also a weakness because the alien had to be careful not to poison itself with its own toxins. This meant it could not use certain attack methods in close quarters or when environmental barriers might reflect its own poison back at it. The final phase of the battle took place in a chamber where gravity shifted in different directions every 30 seconds. Jake used these gravitational changes to avoid Venom Strike's poison attacks, while gradually wearing down the alien's energy reserves. The constant environmental adaptation was exhausting both fighters, but Jake's human flexibility gave him a slight advantage. Venom Strike made its final desperate attack when the arena briefly returned to normal gravity. The alien lunged forward, with fangs extended and claws dripping with its deadliest toxins. But Jake had anticipated this moment and rolled aside at the last second, causing Venom Strike to crash into a wall covered with its own reflected poison. The alien's own toxins proved fatal when concentrated and reflected back by the arena's crystalline surfaces. Venom Strike writhed in agony as its own poison attacked its nervous system. Jake watched from a safe distance as his opponent died from the same weapons it had used to kill countless previous victims. Now only two champions remained, and Jake knew his final opponent would be the most dangerous creature he had ever faced. Cronus the Destroyer had waited patiently through all the preliminary battles, showing no emotion as fighter after fighter was eliminated. The ancient crystal giant had not even bothered to watch most of the contests because the outcome was so predictable. The galactic audience was now paying serious attention to the tournament for the first time in centuries. No one had expected any champion to reach the final battle against Cronus, let alone a human from a species that most aliens considered barely civilized. Betting pools that had dismissed Jake's chances now showed odds that reflected genuine uncertainty about the outcome. Cronus finally spoke to Jake through the arena's communication system, and its voice sounded like mountains grinding together during an earthquake. The crystal giant said Jake was the first opponent in 3,000 years who had earned the right to face it in honest combat. Cronus explained that its species had been the first to achieve interstellar travel and had dominated galactic warfare for millions of years. The ancient warrior revealed that it had fought in 17 previous tournaments and won every single battle without suffering significant damage. Its crystalline body had been forged in the heart of a dying star and could withstand forces that would destroy entire planets. Cronus said it was almost looking forward to facing an opponent who might provide some small challenge. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to Cronus describe its combat record. The alien had killed thousands of warriors from hundreds of different species. It had fought on worlds where the gravity was crushing and in the vacuum of space where most life forms would die instantly. Nothing had ever managed to crack its crystalline armor or slow its relentless attacks. The sixth and final world was revealed as Ultimate Arena, a planet-sized combat zone that combined elements from all the previous battlefields. The arena could shift between any environment instantly, and contestants would face constant change while engaging in what everyone expected to be a fight to the death. Jake spent his final night before the ultimate battle thinking about everything he had learned from his previous opponents. Each victory had taught him something new about adaptation and survival against impossible odds. But Cronus was different from every other fighter. he had faced because the crystal giant had millions of years of experience and had never been defeated. Dr. Walsh's research had provided detailed analysis of Cronus's previous battles, but the information was not encouraging. The ancient warrior fought with perfect technique and overwhelming power. It had never shown any weaknesses that subsequent opponents could exploit. Every fight had ended with Cronus standing over the broken remains of its enemy. Jake realized that conventional tactics would be useless against an opponent who had seen every possible fighting style over the course of millennia. He would need to do something that had never been attempted before, something so unexpected that even Cronus's vast experience would not prepare it for what was coming. As Jake prepared for what might be his final battle, he thought about all the humans throughout history who had faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to survive. His species had climbed down from the trees and built civilizations despite being weaker than most predators. They had crossed oceans and reached the stars through determination and ingenuity rather than natural advantages. The transport to Ultimate Arena felt like a journey to his own execution, but Jake refused to let fear control his thoughts. Somewhere back on Earth, billions of people were depending on his ability to find a way to defeat the most dangerous warrior in galactic history. He could not let them down, no matter what the cost to himself. The Ultimate Arena was a world unto itself, with landscapes that shifted and changed like a living thing. Mountains rose from flat plains in seconds, while oceans appeared and disappeared, according to some alien logic that Jake could not understand. The sky above showed stars from different galaxies, as if the arena existed in multiple dimensions at once. Cronus the Destroyer stood waiting in the center of the battlefield, and Jake could feel the power radiating from its crystalline body like heat from a furnace. The ancient warrior was 20 feet tall, and its arms were thicker than tree trunks. Light bent strangely around its crystal structure, creating rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. When the battle began, Cronus moved with surprising speed for something so massive. Its first punch created a crater 10 feet deep where Jake had been standing a split second before. The crystal giant's strength was beyond anything Jake had imagined, as each blow could shatter mountains, and its body seemed completely invulnerable to any weapon he possessed. Jake tried every tactic that had worked against his previous opponents, but nothing had any effect on Cronus. His combat knife broke against the alien's crystal skin without leaving even a scratch. Environmental hazards that had been devastating against other fighters were simply ignored by the ancient warrior whose body could survive the death of stars. The arena shifted from a volcanic wasteland to an underwater cavern, but Cronus adapted instantly to each change. The crystal giant had fought in every possible environment over the course of millions of years, and no terrain held any surprises for it. Jake found himself being systematically hunted by an opponent who was stronger and faster and more experienced than anything he had ever faced. Cronus caught Jake with a glancing blow that sent him flying across the arena to crash against a wall of ice. Jake felt ribs crack and tasted blood in his mouth as he struggled to stand. The crystal giant approached slowly like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. Jake realized he was going to die unless he found some weakness in Cronus's perfect combat record. But as he lay broken and bleeding, he suddenly understood something that changed everything. He had been fighting like he was alone against impossible odds, but humanity's greatest strength had never been individual prowess. Humans had conquered Earth not because they were the strongest or fastest creatures, but because they could work together and build on each other's knowledge. Every human achievement from fire to starships had been possible because people shared information and learned from those who came before them. Jake began drawing on every lesson he had learned from Colonel Hayes and Maria Santos and Dr. Walsh. He used techniques that combined their different approaches to combat and problem solving. More importantly, he stopped trying to fight Cronus. like a traditional warrior and started thinking like a human. The arena environment became Jake's ally, as he learned to predict its changes and use them strategically rather than just tactically. He studied Cronus's movements and realized that despite millions of years of experience, the crystal giant had developed certain patterns because it had never faced an opponent who could adapt quickly enough to exploit them. Jake began using misdirection and environmental manipulation in ways that even Cronus had never encountered. He made the ancient warrior think it was winning while gradually positioning both fighters for a trap that would take advantage of the arena's most dangerous features combined with the alien's own overwhelming strength. The turning point came when Jake noticed something Dr. Walsh had mentioned in her research about crystalline structures. Cronus's body, while incredibly strong, had natural resonance frequencies that could theoretically be exploited if someone could generate the right harmonic vibrations at sufficient amplitude. Jake began using the arena's sound systems and environmental effects to create subtle vibrations that matched the resonant frequency of Cronus's crystal structure. The effect was not immediately visible, but tiny stress fractures began appearing deep within the alien's seemingly invulnerable body. Cronus noticed something was wrong when hairline cracks started appearing on its arms and legs. The ancient warrior had never experienced physical damage from any opponent and could not understand what was happening. For the first time in its existence, Cronus felt something it had never known before, which was genuine fear. Jake pressed his advantage by increasing the harmonic assault while using every environmental hazard the arena could provide. He turned gravity generators and magnetic fields and thermal systems into components of a massive weapon that attacked Cronus from every direction at once. The crystal giant tried to continue fighting even as its body began to come apart from the inside out. Cronus had never learned to retreat because it had never faced a situation where retreat might be necessary. The alien's own arrogance and inexperience with vulnerability became weaknesses that Jake could exploit. The final moments of the battle saw both warriors pushed beyond their limits. Cronus was experiencing pain and uncertainty for the first time, while Jake was drawing on reserves of determination that surprised even himself. The human refused to give up even when victory seemed impossible because too many people were depending on him. Jake's victory came not through superior force but by demonstrating that adaptability and creativity and pure human stubbornness could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. When Cronus finally fell, its crystal body shattered like a mountain of glass and the sound echoed across the arena like thunder. Collapsed immediately after his opponent conceded defeat. His body was broken and his mind was exhausted, but he had achieved the impossible. Humanity had won the tournament and earned not just the promised star systems, but something far more valuable, which was the respect of the entire galaxy. The alien spectators sat in stunned silence as they tried to process what they had witnessed. A species they had dismissed as weak newcomers had produced a champion who defeated the most feared warrior in galactic history. Jake had proven that humans were not just another minor species, but a force that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Ambassador Veltar approached Jake as medical teams worked to stabilize his injuries. The blue-skinned aliens. Six eyes showed an emotion Jake had never seen before, which was genuine respect. Veltar said that Cronus had been considered invincible for so long that most species had forgotten what it meant to face a truly dangerous opponent. The recovery process took months, but Jake eventually returned to Earth as the hero who had saved humanity from exile. More importantly, he had demonstrated to the galaxy that humans possessed qualities that made them valuable allies and dangerous enemies. Other species who had ignored Earth now sent diplomatic missions seeking trade agreements and mutual defense. Pax. Jake found himself appointed as Earth's first galactic combat advisor responsible for training the next generation of human warriors. But the techniques he taught were not just about fighting, but about the philosophy that had made his victory possible. Every challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger, and the human spirit was the most powerful weapon in the universe. The final scene showed Jake in the same training facility where he had prepared for the tournament, now passing on his knowledge to young soldiers who might one day face their own impossible battles. He reminded them that humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior strength, but through the Kirinthung, determination to never surrender no matter what the odds. As Jake watched his students practice the techniques that had saved their species, he knew that humanity's greatest adventures were still ahead of them. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and dangers that no human had yet imagined. But whatever challenges waited among the stars, Jake was confident that human ingenuity and courage would find a way to overcome them.